Peter was driving a brand new Jeep along the highway and found himself reminiscing about his childhood. His village was only 300 kilometers away, and he hadn't been back for a very long time. He had left after finishing 8th grade and had tried to forget everything. His mother had passed away many years ago. At the time of her passing, he was just a young boy. Peter was returning to his native village for business, a place he had avoided for a long time. He had left home early due to a strained relationship with his father, and he had chosen to establish his own life elsewhere. After his father's death, Peter took on the responsibility of arranging the funeral, purchasing everything needed, and covering the expenses. However, other relatives on his father's side took care of the arrangements in the village. Peter didn't have the courage to go there himself. There was something unresolved in him, a deep-seated grudge against his father. Peter couldn't forget how his father had changed from a sober and caring man into someone who would frequently drink and become violent. The memories of his father's drunken rages, when he would lash out at his mother, were still vivid in his mind. Peter often chose not to spend the night at home when such episodes occurred. One day, when Peter returned home from school, he found his mother lying on the bed, moaning in pain. His father was passed out drunk on the veranda. It was then that he learned of his father's brutal actions, having beaten his mother with a boot. From that day, his mother's health deteriorated, particularly in her chest area, although his father's drinking decreased. Despite the passing years, Peter couldn't find it in himself to forgive his parents for the pain and suffering they had caused. There was a house that had been left behind, and Peter had initially been hesitant to accept the inheritance. He wondered why he needed the trouble, but eventually decided to complete the necessary paperwork. His plan was to inspect the house and find a potential buyer who might be interested in purchasing it. The property included a significant amount of land, and he thought someone might be interested in it for constructing a new house. As he slowly approached the house in his car, which was not the old bumpy milk truck he remembered using in the past, he couldn't help but notice the curious looks he received from the locals. It seemed that they regarded him with suspicion, as they often did with outsiders. The village was home to many prosperous families living in luxury houses, while Peter and his family were not held in high regard. Furthermore, it had been 2 decades since Peter had last visited this place. He drove up to the house, and to his surprise, the yard was unusually tidy. He wondered if someone had cleaned up before the funeral, as he distinctly remembered the yard being cluttered with various items. In the past, there were piles of junk and collections of scrap metal that his father had gathered. Old boards for firewood were stacked around, and the house contained discarded furniture, some of which was salvaged from a landfill. They had intended to either repair or repurpose these items. However, now the yard was clean, and flowers adorned the flower beds. Peter felt a bit awkward as he approached the porch. He peered through the window, but the house was eerily quiet, as if no one was inside. He began to consider the possibility that someone had moved in, and this gave him pause. When he attempted to open the door, it wouldn't budge. It was locked from the inside. It was clear that someone was currently occupying the house. Peter began to knock on the door, rapping it insistently until he heard a response from within. As Peter stood there, the door slowly creaked open, revealing the face of a young girl. He greeted her with a warm smile and said, "Good afternoon." Peter was well aware that his smile had a magical effect on people in various situations, whether with a young girl or with clients at work. He had a way of making problems disappear with just a smile and some sweet words. However, this time, something seemed different. The girl's frown deepened as she gazed at him, and she asked in a somewhat threatening tone, "And who are you?" Peter maintained his composure and asked once more, "I'm Peter, and who are you?" The girl responded, "I'm Christina, Pavel's daughter." "What do you need?" Peter was a bit taken aback at first, but quickly gathered his thoughts and introduced himself more formally, saying, "It's a pleasure to meet you. I'm his son." They both found themselves seated in the kitchen, and Christina promptly brewed a pot of tea. She placed a vase of cookies in front of her unexpected guest and said, "I'm sorry for initially introducing myself as my father. You see, people from various services regularly visit us, and it's a common practice to address issues on behalf of Uncle Pasha. I mistakenly assumed you were from another department." Peter was quite surprised to hear that his father was living with someone. He had always thought of his father as a rude and uncouth person, and couldn't imagine anyone willingly sharing a home with him. Christina explained that Peter's father had fallen seriously ill and had a stroke, requiring assistance. She had come from a village even farther away to buy groceries, and had been informed of the need for a nurse in the area. She was also dealing with her own circumstances, as her grandmother had passed away, and the old house was on the brink of collapsing after standing for countless centuries. She decided to take the job and moved in with Uncle Pasha. As Uncle Pasha's health deteriorated, he had told Christina not to worry and mentioned that his son wouldn't need the house. Even if he came to the funeral, it would be enough. He encouraged Christina to live in the house without fear, assuring her that no one would evict her, and told her to consider it her inheritance. Peter listened attentively, his expression serious as he absorbed this revelation. He wondered if he truly cared or if his emotions were just pouring out. The girl didn't seem to be present, but he referred to her as his daughter, claiming he didn't have a son. He seemed in need of care and warmth. Olia suddenly fell silent, thinking that delving into family matters might not be appropriate. She wanted to convey that it wasn't her father's illness that killed him but a profound sense of loss due to the absence of close family. However, Peter didn't want to share these family details with the girl. Everything remained unspoken. Peter finished his tea and wandered around the house as if assessing the situation. Then he returned to the kitchen. "This is all very interesting and sweet, but you are still not his daughter, and the inheritance isn't rightfully yours. I intend to sell the house," Peter explained. "You have two options." Olia listened in silence, struggling to comprehend how a wonderful person like Olia could have such a son. Peter continued, "You can buy this house from me. It's not worth much, and I'm willing to sell it for a symbolic amount, just to lighten my load of unnecessary property that I don't need either." Peter shrugged, implying that the girl was not wanted here, and she would eventually have to leave. Overwhelmed, she felt she had nowhere to go. "I understand, Peter," she replied, holding back tears. Peter showed some compassion. "I'm not entirely heartless. I'll give you a week to think it over and make a decision. That's how long I'll stay here, and then I'll return to the city." It finally dawned on her that he meant he would stay in the house with her, which, considering the circumstances, made perfect sense. It was his house after all. As the owner of the house, he would live there, and since she couldn't move out yet, she would live with him. Olia nodded gratefully and stepped out into the yard. It was always nice to sit on the swing and contemplate, but today, her thoughts held particular weight. She needed to think, and she needed to think seriously. Peter observed Olia as she went into the yard, then he moved to the farthest room in the house. Everything remained as it was before: a bed, a table, a chair, and a wardrobe in the corner. On the table, there was a lamp, and a shelf held some school books. It had been a challenging day, so he decided to take a short rest. He closed the door to the room behind him and lay down on the bed. Morning arrived, and he hadn't even noticed falling asleep. The night had passed swiftly. The aroma of something baking wafted in from the kitchen. He carefully peeked in and saw Olia deftly flipping pancakes in the air, then placing them on a large dish. He watched the process for a few minutes without her noticing. After a while, she felt a presence, and it startled her. Startled, she jumped up and accidentally knocked the frying pan to the floor. "Sorry for scaring you," Peter said as he walked through the kitchen and took a seat at the table. "You can help yourself to some food." "I'll be in the garden," Peter said, placing an emphasis on the "you." The girl made it clear that she didn't expect him to join her. After finishing the pancakes, Olia quickly settled at the table, drank her tea, and then hurried out into the yard. Peter observed her bustling around from the window. It seemed like she wanted to redo everything before leaving this house. Why would Peter leave? He could sense it from the way she was bustling about. It was evident that the girl had some money, even if it was just a symbolic amount. It was clear that every day, Peter watched the careful and nervous way she tended to the house and yard. She lovingly cared for the flowers and diligently prepared breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Even though she was not exactly welcomed warmly, she behaved like a hostess, never hesitating to ask for his help when she couldn't handle something on her own. They worked together to move heavy objects and cut down an old apple tree. Now Peter realized how much effort this delicate girl had already invested in this place. Recalling the cluttered yard from before, it was hard to fathom how much time and dedication she had devoted to clearing it all away. People often came to her, mostly elderly individuals, and she never refused to help. Whether it was accompanying someone to the store, assisting in carrying heavy loads, sewing, or fixing things, she was always there to lend a hand. Sometimes people simply came to talk and share their thoughts and feelings. One of those evenings, when an elderly lady was visiting and expressing her sadness because her children and grandchildren never came to see her, a profound sense of sorrow and shame overwhelmed Peter. He realized that this stranger had shown more warmth and love to his father during their time together than his own son ever had. While spending time in the village, Peter took a break and went to the cemetery. He cleaned up and ordered 2 identical monuments for his parents' graves. A week passed by, and he decided to postpone dealing with the house for now. He couldn't bring himself to expel Olia. Maybe he didn't want to anymore. On the other hand, Peter began to see Olia in a different light. She was very different from his city girlfriends and colleagues. He was not yet married, and he yearned for the same warmth, care, and respect from others that Olia provided, even though he clearly didn't deserve it. Peter couldn't even fathom coming here with any demands or complaints. Olia worked as a nurse at a local clinic, and all the residents knew her for her kindness. Her beauty, grace, and how she interacted with the outside world only enhanced her appeal. Peter enjoyed watching her more with each passing day. It was delightful to engage in conversation with her during dinner or to lend a helping hand when she needed it. With each passing day, Peter felt a growing sense of manhood and importance. He realized he had developed feelings for her. When Peter had to leave, his responsibilities in the city awaited him, but he found it disconcerting to leave Olia alone. He wondered how she had managed on her own before. She was just too kind, too fragile, and too sweet. Throughout his time in the city, thoughts of Olia never left his mind. He felt the need to resolve something, and after a month, Peter returned to the village with a heavy sense of foreboding. He didn't dare express his feelings to Olia immediately. He was afraid she might not be there anymore. After all, he had told her she needed to move out. He rushed home, navigating the potholes on the way. Upon arriving at the house, he breathed a sigh of relief. Olia was quietly sitting in the kitchen, engrossed in sewing, her large blue eyes staring at him. She didn't quite understand his expression. Peter approached her slowly, and Olia stood up. He reached out and hugged her.